Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to look at the purpose and function of classes that don't have a main method. So let's create a class, so public class, and we'll make it a class of parrots. So public class parrot. And we need some open close braces. And then we're going to brainstorm some data that we might want to collect about a parrot. So maybe we want a string that captures the name of the parrot. We might want an int for the age of the parrot. Maybe we want a double for the weight of our parrot object. Okay, those variables, they're not assigned a value at the beginning of our class. We're just declaring their types, and when we declare types in a class of variables in a class that doesn't have a main method, what we're doing is creating something called instance variables, and that'll make more sense why they're called instance variables as we go. Okay, next, we're going to make a constructor so that we can create an object in this parrot class. So we do that, again, it's public. We don't need a return type, so we're just going to put the name of the class, public parrot, and then an open and closed parentheses. Okay, now this is called a constructor, and it constructs a new parrot object, and with this constructor we can assign values to the instance variables at the top. So maybe if we create a parrot object, we might say that its name is Birdie. Okay, maybe Birdie is 5 years old. And Birdie's weight, how much does a parrot weigh? Okay, we'll just estimate and say this parrot is 6 pounds. Oops. So, well, let's make it, it's a double, so we'll make it 6.3 pounds. Okay, so we have assigned our default parrot to these pieces of data. Now, what if our parrot, when we create a parrot object, has some information about it already available, and it's not the same as the information that we just assigned. So maybe when we create the parrot object, we know its name. So in the parentheses, we're going to put in an argument that receives the initial name of the parrot, and it'll store it temporarily as a string under that variable. Okay, then let's say we also know its age, and that's an int, so we'll call that the initial age, right? And that would be stored temporarily. And then the double, we would know its initial weight. Okay. So now that those values are being passed in to our constructor from outside, we can assign the name instance variable to the value that gets passed by parameter into this constructor. We can assign the age to the initial age that gets passed in, and same thing for the weight. We can take that initial weight and assign it to the variable. Okay? So this will be our default parrot where no values get passed into the constructor and it's just assigned these values. Right? Maybe that's the parrot that we already have, but we want to increase our parrots in our home. So we're going to allow for a constructor where we add additional parrots. Okay? So those would be the objects constructors. Okay, now let's think about some things that parrots can do. So we'll make a method. So public, and let's make this a return method. So the return type, right, we're going to put right here. And that return type is the data type that we're going to return to whatever statement called the method. So in this case, let's say the bird is going to speak. Okay, that's something that, S-P-E-A-K. That's something that birds can do. And that means that the return type would be a string, right? If the bird speaks, it's going to return a string. And then we always, for a method, we're going to need an open close parentheses. Now, if the person has to enter something there that, or some data they want to pass into this method, we would put that inside the parentheses like we did with the constructor. But in this case, let's just say whenever the parrot speaks, it's going to say the same thing. So it will system out print line, and we're going to have it say hello world. So that's what happens when a parrot object speaks. Now let's say that we also want our parrot to tell us its name. So public string and then say name would be our method. And now we're going to have the system out print line be the name of the bird. So that is the variable, the instance variable from our class called name. Okay, so those are two things that the parrot can do. It can speak and it can say its name. Okay, so now if I save this file, remember the file has to have the same name as the class, parrot, both with capital letters. So we'll go ahead and hit save. And I wouldn't be able to run this file because there's no main method, right? So I'm going to need some kind of a runner or a driver file in order to do the things that are in this parrot class with parrots that I own. So I'm going to go up here to File and New Java File. Okay, I'm going to slide that over to my second panel so I have some room to write. And this is going to be public class. I'm going to call it parrot runner. Okay. A runner is a driver for the events that we want to occur in this parrot class. Okay. And the runner is the one that's going to have the main method. So public static void main strings, brackets, args, and then we'll need an open close brace. Okay, and now we have our shell here to get started with our runner program. So the first thing we want to do is create a parrot object, okay, by calling the constructor. So we start with the parrot class, the class name, and that always begins with a capital letter. Then we're going to give our parrot a variable identifier. So I'm going to call him my first parrot. Okay. And then an equal sign to assign, and we need that keyword new whenever we instantiate a new object from a class. And we saw this before in the scanner class. When we created a new scanner to collect user input, we also used that new keyword. Okay, so that's going to call the constructor for our parrot class. So I'm going to create a new parrot object by calling this constructor. And since it's my first parrot, I'm not going to pass any parameters, any data by parameters, because remember my default constructor here for a no parameter parrot has Birdie. He's age 5 and he weighs 6.3 pounds. Okay, so I've created my new parrot object, and now let's have that parrot do something. So I'm going to call the method first parrot dot, and then let's have that parrot say his name. Okay, so I'm going to save this runner. Okay, and then I'm going to compile each of these classes. So the parrot runner class, we want to compile, and it says I have an S on my string. That's why. Okay, so I can debug that error and then compile. We're missing a return statement. Okay, so what I want you to notice here though is we compiled the runner program. The error was found in the parrot class program. And that's because when the compiling happens, it's going to work line by line. And here we call the constructor, and that constructor in the parrot runner is coming over, opening the parrot file, and it's compiling that to make sure there are no errors. So remember when we created this method for public string speak, we said we wanted it to return a string, but instead I had it print instead. Okay, so to show the difference between what that means, here, because it's printing, I'm going to change this return type to void. Right, so when I call the speak method from my runner, it's going to just do this system out print hello world. Now for the name, the say name method, our return type is string. So instead of printing, let's go ahead and send it back, that information. So we're going to return with the keyword return name. And that's going to return the name of the parrot to the calling method. Okay, so back in our runner, okay, we've got it where it's going to say the name. That's going to return name here. So instead of just calling, let's go ahead and print. So system out print line, and we're going to print this method call. So when this line executes, first parrot is the object, right? Then it's going to call the say name method, and it's going to come over here, open this file, return the name, and then that's what's going to output. Then we can also try our first parrot, and let's test his speak. So we'll tell him to speak. Now, I don't need a system out print line for this method call because the speak method has the print in it already. So it will execute that. It's a void, so it won't return anything to the calling method. So let's try to compile again, see if we run into any more issues. Okay, this time, operation complete. So now we're ready to run. When we run, we can't run a class that doesn't have a main method. So we're not going to run the parrot.java file. We're going to execute the runner file. And here's the name of our bird, Birdie, and he speaks and says, hello world, right? Notice that that name Birdie was assigned by the default no parameter constructor here. So new parrot, when we created the new object, it gave Birdie his name. Now, let's say we purchase a new parrot. So our new parrot, he's our second parrot. Okay, keyword new, class is parrot, but now he's got a different name. So for this new bird, I'm going to pass in a string for his name. So maybe this bird's name is Polly, okay, and then a comma. Then I need to enter his age because my constructor requires the name, the age, and then the weight as a double. So I need an integer. Let's say Polly is just 1 year old, and then Polly maybe weighs 2.3 pounds. Okay. So when I create this new parrot object, okay, it's going to go to the constructor. It's going to pass these values by parameter into my constructor and store them as temporarily initial name, initial age, and initial weight. Then the constructor is going to go up to my instance variables, and since we're creating a new instance of this object, right, it's not the first parrot being overwritten, it's a whole new parrot added to my household. So I'm going to go up to these instance variables and reassign new values, not overwriting the original parrot, but a new parrot. So these are instance variables because, again, every new instance of a parrot being added to my household needs its own set of variables. Okay. So let's go ahead and we'll copy these lines from above, and we'll just do the same thing, but this will be for our second parrot. So we can test and make sure our methods and constructors are working. So that compiled. Now we can run, and there's our output for the first parrot, for parrot 1, Birdie, hello world. And now here's our second parrot. His name is Polly, and he also says hello.